1897, the golden age of Europe. Her capital cities twinkle as industry has paved the way to wealth, and science shines the light of reason on ignorance and superstition. But in the darker corners of the old world dwell ancient things that do not submit to modern sensibilities. One man keeps the darkness from overtaking the light. His name, Magoosh Medrek, Vampire Hunter. The creeping shadows of the hungry twilight crawled along the frozen muddy ruts of a lonely road beneath a violet-bruised sky. The whole world seemed to hold its breath, like it knew that the dark was coming, inevitable, unstoppable as the reaper itself, yet powerless to intercede. The weather-beaten inn on the town's outskirts, if indeed one could call 4 buildings and a tumbled-down barn a town, leaned exhaustedly to one side, punched drunk from the harsh winter, its tired timbers no longer standing true at 90-degree angles, but slouching with an air of resigned defeat. The temperature was plunging quickly now that the sun had slipped from the sky and was caressing the treacherous horizon. Tendrils of icy mist, gliding noiselessly along the ground, swirled and swam around the hurried footsteps of the huddled figure as it emerged from the woods. A quick glance up at the fast-fading clouds from the traveler confirmed that it was much later than anticipated, which in this country was a very bad thing. It was the damned forest. The canopy was so thick above the narrow path within that what light did shine through, eventually finding the frost-tinged earth beneath, was strangled and deceptive, a white lie of dim illumination reflected off snow-covered branches, pushing back the death sentence of sunset. The woods deceived with a savage liar's cunning, and with a view of luring the unwary away from safety, slowing their trek abroad until such time as it was too late. The woods were covetous of meat, you see, and how the woods did often feast. This evening, however, they would go hungry for another night, as this particular traveler was savvy to their tricksy glam and had briskly pushed through the mirages and snares, never leaving the path and never pausing to rest. Even so, the sun was almost set, and time was of the essence, literally a matter of life and death now. And with the dying of the light, with each heartbeat hammered hard within his heaving chest, the odds ever worsened and tilted in the house's favor. A sighing wind sprang up, racing across the frozen fields of hay, hibernating lilac and clover, an odorless, colorless wind of no defined shape, but deadly sharp and cutting. It seemed to call, taking on an almost human quality to it, an exhalation of longing and ravenous hunger. The traveler's eyes widened and he quickened his pace, hurrying toward the hunched inn, almost numb, but not from the cold. Sighed the wind again, this time giving pitch and tone to the gust. To a musically trained ear, one might have recognized the unnatural harmony arising from a low, mournful F-sharp and the grating interval of C natural and augmented fourth above. But to Magoosh Medrek, all he heard was crisis. He broke into a full-out sprint now, his winter coat whipping around him, now racing for his life as the last moments of the day drained away like from an opened vein. The inn was close. Otto could see the dull sign swinging in the wind, a cracked and decrepit thing almost illegible, reading the Knight's Solace. The evening took one last deep breath as the sun sank below the hills, its fading rays bleeding one final flash of hope. And then, mere steps from safety, it happened. Otto Medrek heard the sound of shattering glass a split second before he felt the impact, and had just enough time to yelp a garbled cry of surprise before being driven to the ground, stopped dead in his tracks by the application of a raggedy, moth-eaten moose head fallen from on high directly upon his head. The accompanying shower of broken glass tinkled and glittered in its descent into the gathering gloom, disappearing into the snow. Had he not been wearing a thick winter cap, or been less hard-headed than he was, he no doubt would have been knocked unconscious in a spray of blood, scalp flapping, and dark comedy. He had been struck by a flying moose head, after all, but his cap provided some rudimentary protection and rendered the blow as mere blunt force trauma, enough to send him into a heap on the cold ground. He groaned and slowly turned onto his back, fear being quickly replaced by confusion, and then immediate annoyance.
"Where's my infrared coagulator?"
Came the screeching voice from the broken window above to Otto's groggy, ringing ears, cutting through the dim pulsing of blood that was keeping beat in time with his heart, heard internally, but without any actual sound.
"The damn vampires are coming, maybe already here, and I can't find the god-cursed coagulator."
Cried the wind, continuing to build in murmurs and serrated whispers, gathering outside the inn like a bloodthirsty mob wielding torches and pitchforks. Cried the wind, screaming around the sagging wooden eaves, gaining in persistence and malice as the light further retreated to the other side of the world. Cried the hungry wind, ulcerating to be sated. There were actual voices being carried on the breeze now, cold, inhuman voices that embodied all the agony and lethargy of immortal life in those syllables, every last vestige of humanity lost to the frantic fear of death which had claimed countless souls seeking to cheat the reaper his due. Something was coming on the wind. Otto Medrek tried to focus his eyes, struggling to find his feet, which was a difficult proposition as the frozen earth beneath him stalwartly refused to stop spinning. The sun had completely set now and night was in full bloom around him. Even under the influence of his blossoming concussion, he realized that he was not likely to see the dawn. He had to move right now. He lurched to his knees, mumbling a string of incoherent blasphemies to no one in particular, deeply inventive, but nonetheless ineffective at accomplishing anything greater than to draw attention to himself in the gloom. Like a drunk heaving about the deck of a floundering schooner, he forced himself to his feet and hobbled toward the door of the inn. After 2 small steps, which seemed to take years to accomplish, Otto Medrek stopped momentarily to inspect the shattered moose head which had crushed him from on high. The erstwhile moose's facial fur was matted and thin, dusty from neglect. One of the antlers was broken at its base and hung limply off the head, and there was a large wooden plaque that the whole thing had been attached to, now scarred and splintery from the impact of its close encounter of the human head kind. It reeked of mothballs and wood smoke, and in the clean night air, our unlucky woodsman wrinkled his nose. He moved to step around the debris when to his ears rushed a cry of,
"That's not it either!"
Otto Medrek was driven to the ground again as a rogue flying object, this time an attractive French Empire wooden mantel clock with a time-worn patina darkening its mahogany curves, rocketed out of the now glassless window above, landing squarely on his already traumatized bald pate. This time, the surprised vocalization which sprang from his lips was more of a gurgle than a cry, and back down to the snow he went. The wind blew harder from across the fields. The chill and menacing hum prickled Otto Medrek's spine nerves as from the depths of his underbrain in the primal reptilian halls that care only for breeding, feeding, and violent survival His instinct erupted and his body struggled back to its feet independent of any thought, his movement an open defiance against his conscious mind's attempt to shut down as a response to the throbbing, biting pain. He took a step forward, towards the safety of the inn, towards its warm interior, towards his hope of waking up tomorrow morning, a hope which lay a mere 15 feet away now. And as he did, as if in protest, the wind howled even harder.
Where the hell is it?
Came another agitated cry from above.
No! Nein! Nicht! Niet!
Punctuating each yell, objects began to rain down upon the ground from the lit window above, each object clocking poor Magoosh Medrek on his head as he staggered back and forth, a man in a carnival shooting gallery, each new projectile sending him back to the ground in a heap of grief and woe, whereupon he would spring up, turn, and make a feeble attempt at locomoting to safety in the opposite direction, only to be arrested again and again. A brass candlestick, a tattered copy of Heinrich August Ossenfelder's Der Vampir from 1748, 2/3 of a wheel of hard and slightly moldy Parmesan cheese, a striped flannel nightgown, which didn't actually do any physical damage, but it did serve to further confuse poor Magoosh Medrek's senses as it obscured his already dim, star-tinged vision. The wailing wind built to a final crescendo, screaming and crying in a gale outside the little inn whose candles and fire burned feebly against the cold and darkness without. At its zenith, suddenly the wind stopped as if in a vacuum, silence crashing over the countryside like a gigantic cresting wave in a wine-dark sea. At that moment, the door to the inn opened. A shaft of thin but warm light fell across the road as a hunched old lady, quite obviously the innkeeper, bent with years of exertion and heavy fatigue, much like her inn, stepped out into the night. She was draped in a worn but not tattered dress of earth tones, and wrapped in a heavy shawl against the cold. Her booted feet made crunching sounds upon the snow. She held aloft a torch, and without a single glance in the direction of the proceedings, she hobbled her way to a solitary lamp fixture hanging on a length of chain just below the inn's crumbling sign. With an audible vocal exhalation at the effort, she reached up and opened the small, clouded glass door of the lamp, almost out of her reach. As she collapsed off her tippy toes, her hand set the lamp into pendulous motion as she caught herself before she could fall into the fresh snow. As the lamp swung back towards her, she took a deep breath, and with a precision born of decades of repetition, she held the torch aloft at such an angle and height that the tip slid into the awaiting iron cavity, licking the wick in the center of the lamp's housing where it caught immediately. The lit lamp swung away from her again, casting phantasmagoric patterns of feeble light through the wavy glass upon the surrounding night. The old woman brought the torch to her lips and blew loudly, neatly extinguishing the flame with a resounding whoosh. Without looking, she raised the dark torch at just the right moment, and as the lamp made its trip back towards her, its open door encountered the smoking torch, whereupon its swinging motion closed the little door before swinging away again. The old woman then turned around and hobbled back the way she had come, crossing the threshold of the inn and slamming the heavy oaken door behind her. In the void there came a triumphant cry, shattering the momentary quiet.
Aha! That is, Gott in Himmel, I found it!
Came the screeching voice from above. Magoosh Medrek sat up, drew in a shaky breath, and looked up toward the blurry rectangle of light, his eyes focusing just enough to pick out an unmistakable silhouette, backlit in the fenestrated aperture of the inn's upper story, holding what looked like a large, dark gray cucumber, its tip glowing fiercely, on and off, as though engulfed by the fires of hell itself, flashing a light and a dark. Otto's head was spinning. He groped in the darkness, his hand looking for purchase to aid in pulling himself to his feet once again, if indeed that were still possible. Adrenaline had rendered objective thought and the interpretation of exterior stimuli a dodgy business at best, but Herr Magoosh Medrek came from a long line of Schmendriks, and he would not go down to die without a fight. His hand then found something firm yet smooth outside of his limited field of vision, as like a large roast of uncooked meat ensconced within a silken bag. As the burning rectangle of light from above lanced his eyes, creating tracers in his head as it lolled from side to side, he started to pull himself up when a deep baritone resounded from above him.
Magoosh!
Boomed the voice into the dark, its power couched in dulcet tones of malevolence. Magoosh Medrek's heart slammed into his throat, and he froze. He tried to swallow, but his mouth had gone dry. Involuntarily, he grasped more securely onto that unseen limb, like a man overboard might seize upon a life preserver. This was highly ironic, however, as the smooth yet meaty appendage in question belonged not to some discarded item which had assaulted him in his quest for salvation from the night, but to Lord Maximilian de Noapte, and to cling to his well-muscled thigh was akin to embracing a venomous puff-adder, both ill-advised and foolhardy. The vampire, for that's what it was, inclined his head slightly, silver eyes flashing, and raised his voice, which was the voice of the crypt, the very voice of the grave.
Magoosh, won't you come out and play?
From the broken window above, Magoosh Medrek saw the silhouette come forward, and as it leaned out slightly into the night, his vision cleared enough to see him, Magoosh Medrek, vampire hunter.
I have no intention of playing with you, you soul-stealing monster,
Came the reply from the inn.
Now, Magoosh, you are the reason we have come tonight.
Maximilian intoned, bowing slightly in mock politesse.
We have unfinished business. If you refuse to join us of your own free will, then we will be forced to come in and get you. Don't be a doomkop, Noapte!
Screeched Magoosh.
You've got to be invited in, you sorry excuse for a creature of the night. Oh, and look here!
He ostentatiously displayed a piece of parchment.
You're not on the list. You will come out and face me, you miserable little pile of secrets. Yeah, we all played that game. It's a classic. But the answer's still no.
Magoosh Medrek dared a shallow breath, terrified, but fascinated at this exchange. He had always known the legends were true, though tonight was the first time in his 25 years that he had ever seen the undead with his own eyes. He struggled to remind himself that he was very likely going to die, and soon, but in spite of this fact, he couldn't help but feel intrigue and no small measure of pride at the kind of person who could disrespect a vampire. Then Maximilian de Noapte spoke, quietly, dangerously.
And now, Magoosh, you die. Venez la mine.
Magoosh Medrek was conceived, written, and produced by Sasha Moreau.
What the hell are you talking about? Conceived?
Oh, hey, what's up, Magoosh? I just mean the voices, the recording, the editing, the mixing, the sound effects. The whole wacky Gothic cavalcade that is your life comes from me and my brain.
Really? You're 42 years old. Don't you think that's a bit strange, playing make-believe by yourself in your bedroom?
Oh, I'm not working alone. The Magoosh theme and its variations, what you're hearing right now, that was written and recorded by Danny Tuggle.
Yeah, that's great. Just another weirdo.
And additional sound effects are courtesy of Zapsplat.com and Pixabay.com, respectively.
And do they know you're messing around like this?
Oh, yeah. All their sounds are used by permission.
Sehr gut. So tell me, Schatzi, what happens to me next?
Sorry, Magoosh, it's a secret, but I can tell you it's going to be epic. Now, let me do the sign-off real quick. Tune in next week for the next chapter and find out what happens to...
Okay, that was smooth. Very nicely done. So what are you doing now? You want to go get a glass of Petite Sirah?
Oh, hell yeah. Come on, let's go.
Hey,